I'm in Accenture Technology in UK and Ireland. I'm leaning towards technology and security and sitting in between the various verticals and disciplines. So what is interesting is that we normally, I think, overlook very simple thing. With security, I felt, who knows, by the way, this, ever seen this statement? You know, it's called a law because it's attributable to Dan the man. I don't know if you know this guy, but I was blown away by At Stake. Have I heard of At Stake at all at some point? Paul obviously kind of nodding because he's been in the business for long, but late 90s, these guys were the guys to go to in terms of ethical hacking, password cracking, anything that really led to sort of breaking the Windows platform. So Dan was sacked from At Stake at the beginning of 2001. He wrote an insightful paper about Microsoft and the monopoly of Windows, and what Microsoft is doing is bad for the future of business and technology. So that was a long time ago, and it's a very insightful piece of paper. If you look up on the web, you can see kind of really kind of good ideas in there. So obviously, you know, we still use, you know, we've been using Windows for the last, you know, how many decades? Is it good? Not sure, but still. So this is really important. How do you establish the empirical evidence that your security works? How many of you have been are users of Netflix? So probably going to raise, all of you are going to be raising hands. And a couple of years ago, maybe not that long ago, I wept when they introduced blocking or proxying the service, basically, so you can search and look Netflix around the globe. So you can look up for the film. If the movie is not within your country database, you can go off to United States or Sweden using the same accounts, appearing as you're coming from that country, and they can watch that movie. And I thought, how brilliant is this? I was using a very simple OLA service, which is the Chrome plugin into your browser. You pop in, you're VPNing through their systems, job done. And then they started sort of gently, subtly kind of changing that message, saying, you're using some sort of a proxying service. Apologies, but you're not going to be able to watch this content. Please use your own country. Which really kind of implies the ways that they can really rely sophisticated control to say, okay, we know this guy is actually trying to break in and sort of work his way through the network. But still, right, can they actually block you? Do they really want to block you? That's the main question. No, they want to do that. Turning this and flipping into the kind of the banking world as KYC. How many people from the banking industry here? Okay, you know, a couple of hands. So you know when I say know your customer, it's very important. Over the decades, we've built a sort of the system to protect the customer, and you know, it turned out to be a sort of a global surveillance system in some sense, because they want to know everything about you. You know, have you been associated with these addresses before? You know, some silly questions that you have along the way. And I thought, this is really kind of surreal. But still, I think the billions in terms of the frauds, in terms of what are the losses, despite the sophistication of this system, really implies that there is no empirical evidence that that stuff really works. And that really is the bottom line. So how do we shift this into the space where you can empirically prove that your security really works? What Paul has been saying a lot, you know, in terms of zero trust, predominantly around the networks. And I think Forrester guys coining the term zero trust, you know, kind of years ago, you know, they've looked into the space of data flows and the networks and segregations and controls you can put in there. But let's see sort of decentralization of the world that we know of. How this has changed and evolved over time in terms of IT delivery model, in terms of data, in terms of supply chains, is mind-blowing. You know, supply chain today is a physical supply chain, the software supply chain, the information supply chain. That sort of information and sort of the information and software is sort of a called digital supply chain. That really converging now with physical, because the physical instances you're trying to track and sort of provide insights back to the business somehow becomes sort of bundled into one. And it's really hard to distinguish. So when Paul and guys from Jericho decided to come up with a sort of model, really was working beautifully, but still I think we have a big sort of duct tape across everything we do, trying to compensate, rather than kind of coming up with something that truly evolves with the business models that we have in our own enterprises. So as you can see, clearly kind of now we have multiple interactions between things, and you're really single tiny dots in that space of extended enterprise, or however you want to call it, because you're not actually that big enough. You have your partners and everyone else on your pay list, they actually represent your business. How do you know that they do good security on your behalf? Whether it's the Googles, Microsofts, Amazons of this world, still it's a big question mark. So speaking of decentralization and defragmentation, I felt this is very important to say, and I think Martin and the guys, and obviously a lot of vendors outside, and Klaus himself probably previously, they can relate to the kind of the custom-orientated model. So what has changed is, I used to work for a beverage company, Diageo, if you ever tried Johnny Walker's, their brand, but this is the sort of, the typically kind of what you deliver is a product. So in the old days, it was really product-centric. You have one product, multiple customers, no brainer, it's easy, right? You sort of selling bucket loads of boxes of drinks, and that's pretty much it. So if you flick it back today, where it's a customer-centric, you have these products revolving around the customer. And then basically it really complicates the model in the sense of architecture, security, IT delivery, and everything else. How do I actually sustain this? How do I make sure that this is ready for the customer-centric world and the age of the customer? Why is that important? Because a friend of mine who leads one of the energy suppliers in the UK, the development business, part of the business, not necessarily just DevOps, but creating the business opportunity. Now they said they've been having some insights with their customers and say, can we bundle up new products for you? Can we bundle up, I don't know, broadband services, mobile operators on top of the energy and electricity we sell you? And a lot of people turn back and say, we don't want any of that. We just want electricity and gas, many of those. It really makes you wonder, now that you're sort of trying to sort of come up with new business ideas, some of the people are fairly simple. They want really kind of simple products. But at the same time, you need to cater for other customers that want more, to entice them to buy your products. Really reflecting, again, decentralizing everything that we do, okay? Flipping now and focusing on data. Why data is important, and I feel the data is sort of really the key, and then we pointed out many times, because I think we think about too many things in terms of what we need to secure, what we need to focus on. Are those the devices? Are those the identity management pieces? What is the cloud security? So everything can have the sort of suffix of security. You just put sort of the buzzword in front, big data security, Internet of Everything security. What about those things? Essentially, if you ask yourself, where do you sit in this spectrum as a business, will give you some indication how well you're going to be able to sort of define, offense to defense. If you're a business heavily regulated, if you're a farmer or a bank, basically you'll be sitting up the slope and you're going to be looking maybe I need to sort of spend more defense. Really that's changing all the time. With the open banking kind of perspective, banks have done something tremendously. They've opened the gates via the APIs to other businesses to come up with the new business models. So what does that mean really in terms of data management? Data management really is about, one side of the things is control, the other side is flexibility. Are you willing to define security for flexibility? Security, flexibility, not necessarily works in sort of the regular head of a CISO. We don't really provide flexibility. We want really good security. And when you look at that sort of what Paul was saying, hard shell around, it's really outside in, sort of making sure that everything stays close to, what I think is the best way to protect the data versus, inside out. There are no boundaries whatsoever. You want to provide access to our partners and everyone else. So it really complicates things. So think about this in terms of what and how security should should work, because I feel that really it puts the sort of the balance between where you're making compromises and why. We do have a zero trust in the title, but I like to think zero trust seriously will never exist. And I think digital truth is what is the key, I think, in this sort of sense. You know, zero trust, yes, but essentially we're talking about the maximum truth in the stuff we do. Why empirical evidence of your security, that it is effectively operational and working. You know, can I put trust on my data? So if you look at this, it really kind of revolves around a simple idea. So if we had, as professionals, we had this sort of triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Let's sort of flip it back so we can understand the business context. If we say protect access, protect development, and protect data, that really kind of resonates better, because when you say confidentiality, integrity, availability, you know, it's sort of very difficult for people in the business to understand anymore. Is it relevant if you're drafting a risk statement? How does it work? You know, how much confidence I get if you say this stuff is actually kind of leaning towards the confidentiality. So let's encrypt everything. Let's, I don't know, lock down our laptops, you know, make sure the mobile devices are encrypted and so on. Let's make sure the channels are encrypted, VPN everything, whatever that might be. So is this really working for you as a professional to sort of say back to the business, guys, if we do this, everything will be perfect. So starting off with identifying, profiling, visualizing your data, where you can really safely say, I know where at least structured data is within my business. So if you remember the slide at the beginning, sort of those small dots, that sort of visualization could be across all of those dots, but you can safely say, I know where the data is. To protect and govern, this is really what it comes to mind as in, you know, the regular dental floss of identity and access management. You know, looking from the space of the user, the identity, the human, the machine or a device where you want a fingerprint in some way, so we know, you know, what kind of browser is coming, you know, sort of to access the application, what kind of device and so on. But more importantly, what we're really hearing is machine learning, artificial intelligence in terms of the UBA, you know, geo-velocity. If I would say, my point with Netflix, let's say we say they need empirical evidence for them to sort of confirm that that control is working. If I would be flipping from one country to another using the proxying service, you know, 1 minute I'm in Sweden, next minute I'm in Austria. So velocity will trip up immediately that and say, it's impossible for you to come up with these two countries within 2 minutes. Something's wrong here. So some of the things they can put in place is safely, you can clearly say, yep, UBA works, I can stop this, and you issue a warning. But do they really want to do that? No. Because obviously they want more money. They want those 10 quid from you every month you're going to be paying for, I don't know, HD or 4K content you use, right? So working out across these various business and technology domains, you can see the operational technology, information technology, and internet of everything. So imagine sensory of things. So this uniformly works across all of these domains, and what really points to is building that value and allowing you to sort of build a platform to sustain growth, whatever the market sort of interruptions you're going to have, whatever compliance, legal, regulatory pressures you're going to have. That really pushes you towards that goal and really speaks volumes. So coming back to data, we did say about sort of making sure that the boundaries are secure, and sort of beyond corp, I have issues with that. What Paul was pointedly kind of alluding to and sort of looking into that is basically there's nothing new in that concept whatsoever. And when you look at that, really sort of simplifies, modernizes the idea of, again, having another layer, defense, around something they deem to be required or important, and really making sure that that fence is still okay. Okay? So this is the flip, saying defense is okay versus what about data and digital assets. So data could be anything. You know, is it firmware sitting on on your phone, or is it a firmware on your thermostat? Is it an executable code you try to load onto a machine? It could be anything, an API, a Word document. So making sure the digital asset is okay is a very interesting idea. So making sure that you can provide the empirical evidence back to your business to say, yep, I can do this now. So this is very complex. I was trying to sort of make it as simple as possible. But let's say that we have a zero trust sort of digital truth into a digital supply chain. We want to instill this. We want to really kind of create something that will really kind of make sure that we do have empirical evidence of things. So let's say we have an executable code of any kind, something you want to load onto a machine, something you want to load onto a, I don't know, maybe a controller in a power plant. Something that Stux was maybe 10 years ago, Stuxnet, if you remember that malware that was infected the power plants. Basically, that was a compromise of a firmware. So imagine that you have something similar you want to protect. So in step one, you can say, okay, what do I need to do to create a sort of a compromise-free state for this particular asset? And I want to really make sure I provide the evidence back at the end of this that this will be secure and safe. So what it does is basically provides a risk scoring exercise. It provides the insight into the time, which I think somebody pointed out, how this artificial intelligence works. It's very important, the time, the data lineage and provenance of things. So you see how assets will be changing over time. Because I think we as security professionals, we can seriously, when we get a breach, it's always kind of that point in time. What happened before, God forbid what's going to happen next, we have no idea. It's very difficult to establish. So in this case, we have an identity of a tool, which we can say, just for kind of sake purposes here, we say Black Carbon, FireEye, you name it, sort of any of these vendors can actually provide a, how the risk score is generated. It's based on the malware analysis. So we say that, and we really kind of provide an evidence which is really caching a signature of some kind of those two things. Moving into the second phase, creating an entity where you can safely say that once it goes in there, it will be intact. But more importantly, you provide the forensical evidence that you can go into and provide that back to your business to say, if something does happen, I do have an evidence of these things taking place, who, when, why, what, and so on. And you can provide that, and it is admissible in any court of law, if you want to. So in this case, you again kind of have a user machine, you have the signatures of the above from state one, but at the same time, you want to make sure the user machine submitting this is authorized for this action. So you have additional step, and then again, you sign everything. Whenever you do this, there is a distinguished element in the blockchain which will be kind of having its own life. And again, going into the blockchain or ledger of any kind, that point in time, you always have a time lineage as well. Basically, what happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future. And finally, it goes sort of going into kind of the regular phase, into the operations. Security operations and the guys sitting there monitoring, they're going to have the information of this. The executable code will go over the air somewhere. It's going to be delivered. And then basically continuous monitoring will be doing its job. So at the end, we do have evidence of this being empirically kind of effective. We do have evidence that data is secure, whatever that might be. And more importantly, it really is technology agnostic. So what are the kind of, I'm not going to really kind of spend too much time on this, and there's a really kind of, it's a really broad topic. But what is happening with this is, I want to say again, the new triad emphasizing on protect access, protect development, and protect data. As I say, development, not necessarily DevSecOps. It just goes into the space of secure development and the old secure lifecycle development, sort of phase. Those are the things we need to sort of pay attention to. Identifying, investigating, where data sits, building data flows, All of the things around the networks, all of the things about the devices themselves will still exist. Don't get me wrong, but sort of saying whether those things are really critical for you to establish zero trust or digital truth within your business, I don't think they're necessarily vital, because you're going to be still doing them but not really focusing that much on them. Data strategy position. As the slope was identify offense and defense, you need to ask yourself, where do you sit in that spectrum? How this will inform your security and architecture is very important. Bringing protection closer to data. As the previous example was showing, this is where the integrity verification is important versus anything that is confidential. With Beyond Corp and what Google was saying, I have a big issue. They have a trust repository in there. The last component is sort of flexible trust. Certificates and everything else, as we all know, they rely on secrets. Anything that is really revolving around the regular encryption, I have issues with secrets, because secrets tend to be kind of revealed, and then really everything collapses. Everything gets, in a sense, you get into the exposed in the news. You have a breach. So with the integrity as a sort of very critical element of your strategy, data security strategy, becomes very important that you don't need to have an encrypted channel to pass these things around. As those signatures I was referring earlier, they're not sensitive. They're just really kind of 256-bit hash using SHA-256, sort of hashing algorithm. There's nothing in there sensitive. So when you look at that, it really offloads your current mindset in terms of where do I need to look into in terms of to achieve security. Zero trust, digital truth, as I would say, cannot be achieved unless we prove the following: identity, time, integrity, and provenance. Whether it's a human, actually interacting, or machine, a system of some kind. And it's very important we have these things in mind. Imagine audits that you have today. You're coming in 6 monthly or whatever that might be. You walk into your vendor's environment, you want to audit, you want to confirm this is, really good. They're going to issue with various certificates, various signs of their compliance with security standards. How do you know that? With this and something this, implemented, you can safely say, you basically say, do I really need security audit process at all? Because at any given point, you can verify the authenticity of a user, machine, data, or digital asset you are trying to protect. Cross-discipline integration, interoperability, collaboration. So imagine this: you have developers. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow in this, application security sense. But you do want to implement these things across operations technology, IT. You do want to make sure you have links and interconnections between development, CI/DI, QA, operations. You need to make sure that whatever goes to Splunk is being actually the event taking place and is taking place as of now, rather than something that we tripped, basically kind of by accident. Real-time notification really brings things to life again. You want to know when things do happen, why do they happen, and so on. And finally, I would imagine with some of this, which is relatively kind of progressive and unconventional, we need within the business, and at the same time, people advising from the outside, such as, distinguished colleagues from Kuppinger Core or Accenture. We need progressive minds in there. And I think that progressiveness will lead us to sort of new, horizons of security, which hopefully will be something far more efficient than it is today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.